and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we talk about books and other words too. I just realized that we read the books and other words too, but I guess we also talk about them, so I'm not wrong.
We do still talk about them. I thought you were just, changing things up.
I would never do that without asking you first. It's too late now. That's what's in it. All right. Well, other than that happy little accident.
Are we not going to introduce ourselves?
Oh, I guess we could do that. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and we have just completely changed our introduction today.
Well, we can at least get back on track a little bit with starting off on a positive note. Sarah, what's something good that happened this week?
I actually have had a lot of good things happen this week, but two of the good things were, one, I got my first shot of the vaccine this afternoon, which is very exciting. But even more exciting than that, I bought 1,000 bricks off of Craigslist. No, that's not a joke.
A literal ton, except I guess a ton refers to the weight and not the count.
Yes, literally 1,000 bricks. Actually, a little bit more because the person from whom I bought them gave me some extra.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, it was lovely. So I have a lot of bricks in my driveway right now.
What are you doing with all of those bricks?
I am bricking off my backyard because lawns suck. I don't like lawns.
I do like that. I asked what you're doing with all those bricks, and at first I thought your answer was bricking.
I did consider it. I did consider it. Good things that have happened to you this week.
Mine is a little bit silly, and it's also a little bit of a preview for something we're going to talk about later in the episode. But this week, I made pan-fried knucklehead trout that we ate during a D&D session, which is not a non sequitur, I promise, because pan-fried knucklehead trout is a delicacy of the Icewind Dale region in, I'm just going to call it D&D land. Yes, there's an actual word for it, but I don't expect people to know that off the top of their heads. And it was just really fun eating Icewind Dale food while we were adventuring in Icewind Dale.
That sounds delightful.
And it was delicious.
It sounds delicious too. Delightful and delicious.
Yeah. And I got to brag to all of our friends who were playing D&D with that. Oh, that paragraph long description the DM just read for the tavern food? Yeah. Eating that right now.
Very nice. And what are you drinking tonight?
Tonight, I am drinking a vodka soda with just a splash of cranberry and lime.
That sounds good.
It is. How about you?
I'm drinking Blindwood cider. I think I've mentioned Blindwood before in one of our earlier episodes, but they're this lovely, small little cider maker that's local to me, and they hand deliver, and they're just the nicest people, and I love them so much, and their cider is good. I know that you have a lot of cider because you're in Ciderland, but someday I'm going to ship you some of their cider because it's very nice, and I want to support them.
Well, they probably won't hand deliver it to me, but I'm sure it will still taste just as good.
It will still be delicious, even if it's not delivered by Drew or Aaron or Kathy. Those are the three people who run the company.
That's adorable.
It's so cute. I love them so much. I really do.
Well, on to the topic of books, which is theoretically what we're talking about today. Have you read anything good lately?
Yeah. So I finally finished Children by Bjorn Larson, which I mentioned in the last podcast. And it was very good, very dark, as I said, but very good. I am eagerly awaiting the second one, which is not going to be out for a while, I don't think. But I will read it when it does come out. And I read some poetry. I've discovered my mother is writing poetry. And so I finally convinced her to give me some of her poems, and I read those. And I also read another collection of poetry that I discovered via Twitter. And bear with me for the title, because it's kind of long. The title is Dear Gloria, Dear Madeline, Dear Siobhan, Dear Ethel, Dear Eloise, Dear Wendy, Dear Becky, Dear Lisa, Dear Liza, Dear Michelle, Dear Tamika, Dear Tanya, Tonight. And one of the poems in there, Porch Light, is maybe my favorite poem ever. It's real good.
Can you explain why that is the title? Because I feel like that you owe me an explanation now.
My understanding is that it's a collection of poetry written to a bunch of imaginary girlfriends.
Okay.
Yeah, and the names do show up in the poems.
Okay,
Yeah.
With a name like that, there has to be some kind of reason, right?
Yes.
Actually, if there wasn't, that would be even better. but I would also like to know.
Yes. Yes, there is a reason. What have you read recently?
I also read a collection of poetry. We are still in National Poetry Month, so we are, well,
on topic.
Yeah. But I read Krypton Nights by Brian D. Dietrich, which is a collection of poetry written around the idea of Superman. It's in sections. The first section of poems is from Superman's perspective, and then the next section is from his father, the alien Jor-El, not his farmer,
not his human
father. Yeah. And then there's a section from the perspective of Lois Lane, and then it ends with I did want to call him Jesse Eisenhower, but Lex Luthor. There we go. I don't know if that's even the actor who plays him. They just all look the same.
I have no idea who plays him.
Well, the last section is from the perspective of Lex Luthor. It's very good, extremely thoughtful, and not super optimistic. But you know, how can the concept of Superman be when you start thinking about it? I was a little bummed that all of Lois Lane's poems were about Superman's junk. Like, she wasn't given a single one that was about something else.
Was this written by a man?
Yes. Presumably, yes. And, I mean, alone, they were all very good. And probably some of my favorite lines from the collection were from her poems. But there could have been a little variety.
She could have been given a little more subject matter.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
But this book was also a gift. And, you know, gifted books always have that sort of extra emotional value. So,
right.
You know, while I was reading this, I was remembering my poetry professor from college who gave this to me when I graduated, and was very... It was an emotional trip in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, there's that extra context that adds to what you take away from the poetry.
Absolutely.
So before we get any further in this podcast, I have a slight correction that I need to make. In our last episode, in the Journey to the Center of the Discworld segment, I said very definitively that the librarian gets turned into an orangutan in The Color of Magic. And actually, it's The Light Fantastic, the second book. But it's within the first 8 pages. It's on page 8. So I feel like somewhat vindicated.
Well, I think really what that means is that I was correct and that they are basically the same book, and distinguishing between the two of them is pointless. And now you have to agree with me because it makes you look good.
Yes, you're correct. I do have to agree. Did I really disagree with you all that heavily?
No, but I still like hearing it again.
Yes, Lily, you are right. You are right. They are basically just one long book.
Thank you. Now, I assume you have read some Wheel of Time since last we spoke.
Yes, I did not mention it in my earlier answer because I had other things to talk about. But I did, in fact, finish book 11 of Wheel of Time, which is The Knife of Dreams. And on the whole, I really enjoyed it. I have this book in hardcover, and I have to say that these books are so big that reading it in hardcover is just not fun.
It's like an arm workout at the same time.
Yeah, it's just heavy. It hurts my hands to hold. It's not very often I say that. I tend to prefer hardbound books over paperback, but this is an exception to that. And one of the things that I noticed was that there's a lot more spanking references in this book. So I think that you're right. I think Robert Jordan just had a thing for spanking.
If there's no in-world justification for it, what else could there possibly be?
The in-world justification for at least one of these is that Rand was doing something dumb, and an Aes Sedai uses her magic to spank him because he's doing something dumb.
That's not an in-world justification for two adults to be doing this outside of sexual relations.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was more talk about like thinking about spanking. And so he just has a spanking kink.
You know, a writer will have their core beliefs bleed through in their work. How could you not? You know, you're the one creating this world. And so now I have to assume that his core belief is that spanking is good and everyone should do it.
You might be right.
It's absurd that comes up so much.
It comes up a lot.
In such a strange context. Like, it blows my mind.
Yeah. I'm inclined to agree with you. But moving on to other thoughts, not to dwell too much on spanking. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that there's a lot of implications of lesbian relationships in Wheel of Time. Specifically, it was mentioned in this book that there were pillow friends between Aes Sedai, pillow friends being like, and then they were roommates, except that they're actually sleeping together. And I really would have liked to see that explored more. Like, how do these former relationships shape politics in the tower being like where all of the Aes Sedai, the women magic users, go to learn magic and to train their skills. And it's the only place where they can learn magic. So I really would have liked to see how that affects politics in the tower. Like, I want it to have more impact than just a passing mention. But on the other hand, I don't really think that Jordan would have been able to handle it in a way that I, as 21st century reader, would have appreciated. Like, I don't think that he would have done it particularly well.
Well, there probably would have been a lot of spanking.
Yes, there probably would have been.
Kind of, just from your discussion of it, it sounds to me like that idea that relationships between women are not legitimate relationships.
I don't know if there's that implication, because pillow friends is not specifically a term used to describe lesbian relationships.
Are there any other lesbian relationships that aren't described as pillow friends? I think it's going in that direction. Like, the author said, oh, they're just pillow friends. It's not a real relationship.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Instead of the other way. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, are there any other lesbian there are none that I can think of off of the top of my head. There is one Forsaken, the Forsaken being, some of the villains of the story, as I'm sure that you could gather from the name, who I think just does it with everyone, but that's not specifically a lesbian relationship. Maybe I'm wrong, and someone who has read the series more often or who is a deeper fan of Wheel of Time could tell you definitively. I can't. But I also just think, and this kind of brings us to the other thing that I wanted to discuss, and we need to put a content warning here.
To avoid spoilers for the Wheel of Time, skip to 1640.
Okay, I got you covered. Hit it.
Yes. So Matt, who is one of the main male characters, has this relationship with Tuon, who eventually becomes his wife. So it's prophesized that the daughter of the Nine Moons will be his wife. And in book 9, he discovers that that is Tuon, Tuon being the heir apparent to this large nation across the sea who has come and invaded Randland. And
now that's not actually what it's called, right?
Randland?
That's a meta thing.
No, it's not what it's actually called.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if, obviously all of the countries are given names, but I'm not sure if the continent is ever named.
I just wanted to clarify. I did not want to cast aspersions on Robert Jordan, implying that he named something Randland.
No, he did not actually name. This is, I believe, a fan thing. He did not actually name it Randland.
Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Anyway, so in this book, he finally marries, at the very end, he finally marries Tuon. And on the one hand, I really like the relationship. I think that their relationship is the most realistic of all of the relationships between the main characters and their significant others. Jordan writes relationships like he knows where he wants the relationship to go. So you have a point A and you have a point C, and you don't really see the progression through point B. It doesn't feel like there's a realistic relationship developing. It's sort of like these characters are 1 minute they're not in love, and then the next they are in love. Or in the case of Min, she knows that she's going to fall in love with Rand because she has visions and has seen it. So she just one day decides that she is in love with Rand, and then she's in love with Rand.
See, but that could be an interesting exploration of self-fulfilling prophecies, but it sounds like that's not where that went.
That is not where that went.
All right.
Min as a character could be so good. She has so much potential to explore, like you say, self-fulfilling prophecies and what happens if she tries to work against her visions. And that's just not ever, it's not a thing. It doesn't happen. But so with Tuon and Matt, I really like how their relationship progresses. It feels like they have a genuine progression. And Tuon, being the heir to this large throne, when she says that she'll marry him, she does it not because she's in love with him, but because she thinks that there's the possibility for love and she's seen it prophesized. So it feels more realistic.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
And they've also spent a good number of months like traveling together. So she doesn't do it just immediately upon meeting him.
Right.
But on the other hand, Tuon is the head of this invading country that enslaves women and kills a lot of people. And she's very unapologetic about enslaving magic users and does not think that she's wrong about that. And so I can't really like her.
That is a very complicated character.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm not sure how sympathetic we're supposed to find her. Like, I think we're supposed to find her fairly sympathetic. But on the other hand, she unabashedly talks about enslaving these women. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little non-ideal.
Yeah. It just complicated feelings.
Although we try our best, repeat our pronunciations at your own risk.
We both read a very fun book for this week. The Servant of the Underworld by Alliette de Bodard. Now, I had read this once before, but this was your first time reading it, I believe.
Yes, it was my first time reading it. And I have to say, I enjoyed it, but my first thought upon opening the book and getting to that first page was that this book is written in the first person. And as you have stated multiple times, that's not your fave. So I was very surprised to see that because this was a book that you had suggested.
Yeah, I hated that the whole time. Don't worry.
Okay. All is right with the world.
Any book that you read, there's going to be something about it that you don't love. And you just got to get over that. Otherwise, I wouldn't read anything, because what if there's one thing I don't like about it? Yeah, the narration bugged the shit out of me the whole time. I was eventually able to sort of filter it out as background noise and not really notice that, but yup.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind it, that particular thing.
The prose of this book was sort of like tortilla chips, where I only eat tortilla chips so I can get salsa in my face. And I really loved the story and the mystery and the exploring this pantheon that I was not super familiar with going into it. And so, I dealt with the tortilla chips, okay? I got over it. Because it turns out if you eat salsa with a spoon, people look at you like you're crazy.
Part of the joy of eating salsa is like the crunch and the salt that you get from the chip. I'll take that as a you disagree with me.
I just admitted to eating salsa with a spoon. Anyway, back on topic. This book takes place in the Aztec Empire, which was fascinating, not an era that I'm super familiar with. And I probably only knew one god from the pantheon, Quetzalcoatl, which I feel like is the only one anyone has any name recognition for.
Yeah, that was the only one that I knew too.
And this book was just such a great introduction. I'm not saying, it's clearly not a textbook. I don't want to say it's learn about the Aztec Empire by reading this book. But it definitely was a setting that I was unfamiliar with and really enjoyed experiencing.
One of the things, and this is unrelated to the book plot or anything, but one of the things I really liked about it was that de Bodard has some notes at the back of the book where she discusses the historical setting and what particular elements she changed and fudged. And she also has an entire bibliography. And I really loved that. I thought that was not something you see very often in a book that's inspired by a particular era, but I would like to see more often.
It made me really appreciate the details on another level.
Yeah, agreed.
The title character, the main character, the first person perspective, is from the servant of the Underworld, because he is the high priest of the Temple of the Dead. And I bring that up because A, it is very important to the plot, and B, it did give me some Aberson by Garth Nix vibes. Really the only overlap, but something I liked about both of them is the idea that there is necromancy for the power of good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, death magic, necromancy is almost always a bad thing.
Yeah, it's neutral in this case.
Right.
Really, yeah.
The main character uses it for, I would say,
for good. Yeah.
Yeah. He uses it to solve mysteries, and then also to keep the balance between the living world and the dead world, the Underworld, which is more of the Garth Nix series. And as you might have been able to tell, the gods in this book are real, which is also something that I really enjoy. That interaction between the physical world, magic, and then the gods, who are not untouchable concepts, but have restrictions and personalities, as just something I really enjoy.
I agree with you. I really enjoyed that the gods were more than just a concept, that they were actually characters in their own right who had an effect on the outcome of the plot. And I felt that the way that the magic system worked was unique, and immediately, like, you see that from page 1, you see an example of the magic system. And I loved the combination of poetry and ritual and sacrifice that was involved. It felt fresh and like something that I had never seen before.
I did like it conceptually. It was a little brutal. I mean, the characters are sacrificing. It's pretty gory. It's not graphic, but there is a lot of cute small animal murder in this book that is dealt with on a very matter-of-fact level, which I had to get desensitized to. It definitely took me a little bit to not cringe every time that happened.
That's fair. I feel like I'm already a little desensitized to that because of a place that I worked that dealt with death on a fairly of small animals on a fairly regular basis. But
I mean, taxidermy, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Doesn't it already happen? But like the actual murder of a thing.
Okay, so we weren't murdering animals, but we definitely were skinning them.
Really? Okay, I didn't realize you were that involved with the process.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't the one who did any of the skinning, but skinning and like domestic beetles eating the flesh. Yeah, that we did that.
Okay. Well, it's for me, what really got to me in this book were the descriptions of the little weasels cowering in the back of their cage. No, weasels are cute.
It was brutal. I'm not arguing there.
I think it's like that emotional, they know what's coming is hard. This might say something about me, but the other method of blood magic bothered me much less, which is essentially self-harm. Magic users would cause themselves to bleed to use their own blood sacrifice. Something about it being their choice instead of being inflicted on this poor defenseless animal bothered me much less.
It also didn't involve death. I mean, like, there is one scene where the main character uses the bleeding and eventual death of another character, a slave, to do magic. And I don't think the slave really consents to that, but...
No, but he also wasn't the one who... Like, that, it was incidental.
He wasn't inflicting the wounds, yeah.
I do think the concept of slavery was very... It's definitely not what I, as an American, think of when I hear the word slave. It definitely felt more like what I would think of as indentured servitude, but maybe I'm just splitting hairs.
I think that's just splitting hairs, yeah.
Well, I thought it was interesting that in this world, as I understood it, if you were bought out of slavery, there was no stigma attached to having once been a slave. It wasn't like, that is who you are forever.
Yeah, you didn't necessarily remain a lower class of person because you had been a slave.
Right. That's just not the concept that I'm used to. Now, since this was the second time I read the book, I have the comment that some of the foreshadowing in it was very fun. And this wasn't foreshadowing in the way that some mystery novels are, where the author is leaving breadcrumbs that you could figure it out.
And that you're expected to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
This was a throwaway piece of dialogue at the very beginning that has nothing to do with anything, but knowing how the book ends is a direct reference to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like foreshadowing doesn't even feel like the right thing to call it. It's just it was just really, like, I thought it was neat. It definitely added value to the reread because I was able to notice those things.
I think that still counts as foreshadowing. Obviously, that's not something, because this is the first time I read it, that's not something I picked up.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see that it does add more depth and dimension to the book on rereading.
Maybe this is where we transition into spoiler talk, because there is some foreshadowing that I think was very, not very obviously foreshadowing, but more of a Chekhov's gun situation where this thing is mentioned, and as the reader you go, oh, they must be going somewhere with that.
To avoid spoilers for Servant of the Underworld, skip to 42:12.
The main character, Akadal, the high priest of the Temple of the Dead, constantly mentions how much he does not want to run into the spirit of his dead father, because he is dealing with the underworld, and so that's actually something that he might accidentally do. And several points in this book, he says, God, I really hope I don't run into him while he is doing something in the underworld. And surprise, surprise, at the end of the book, in the climax of the book, the bad guy does use the vision, the spirit of his dead father, to try to get into his head, which that is foreshadowing that I think that you can see that and go, yeah, they're going somewhere with this.
I agree, except that I kind of was surprised that they didn't go, they didn't actually do very much with that. Like, I thought that that the father would be used more than just kind of a prop for that scene. I thought that there would be dialogue and it would be more emotionally taxing on Akadal than it was. I mean, not to say that there wasn't an emotional component. I just thought that it would go further, given how much he had talked about not wanting to have this conversation with his father. There was no conversation.
Well, this is kind of going in two directions. One, I don't think that discounts the foreshadowing. That is still an example of foreshadowing that the reader is intended to pick up on.
Yeah, it doesn't discount the foreshadowing at all. I'm not saying that it does, but
versus, now we're in spoiler time, so I can say it. In like one of the first couple pages, some random character just mentions like, sure would suck if the gods like had a big old war and we were stuck in the middle of it. Which then ends up being the main thrust of the book. It is uncovered that is the root of the mystery that the main character is trying to solve. So, to the scene with his dead father, though, because of the way that is resolved, in that Akadal is realizing that he was assigning all of this to his family dynamic, he has a lot of baggage.
He has family issues.
He has huge family issues, but they're kind of self-created. And at the end, he admits that he chose the career he did because he wanted to. And that was like a big deal for him. And so I think the spirit of his father having such a minor role can be connected back to
thematically. Yeah.
His family issues were an excuse. They weren't actually like holding him back in any way. He was using it as an excuse to not be his own person.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I just was still expecting more from it.
Yeah, for sure. It really does pick up in the second half.
This is de Bodard's first novel, and I think that that's evident in the way some of the pacing is shaky and some of the characterization is a little shaky, like to me anyway.
Yeah, I don't think I get too invested in any of the characters until quite near the end.
Well, there's all of this backstory to the characters that is discussed in passing, like a Coddle had a previous apprentice who died, and he can feel the wind of knives, which is this arbiter of justice for the Lord of Death, I guess.
Yeah. The wind of knives is I'm going to use the word monster, but that's not quite right.
Former human,
but is now made out of shards of obsidian, so I wouldn't say very human anymore.
Yeah, no, not very human.
Who punishes people who misuse necromancy.
And a Coddle can feel the Wind of Knives' presence whenever the Wind of Knives is in the human realm. And that's not, like, there's mention of he had some previous episode which caused him to have this connection, but that's never really further explored. And then it feels like there are more layers to a Coddle's relationship with his brother's wife. And I wish that had been covered more. I feel like I came into this feeling like I was reading book 2 in a series, and that these characters had already been established and I was missing information that I should know.
I get that. I actually think one of the ways that could have been fixed was to give less information.
Certainly. I mean, that would have worked too.
Because, you're allowed to have a character that has a life before the book. But if we had been given more hints and less, here's some exposition to explain, this connection between me and the Wind of Knives, then I think it would have not stuck out as much.
Yeah, like my issue is that it felt like I was supposed to know this stuff and I didn't. Whereas if there had been more, I would have gotten the explanation that I wanted, or if there had been less, I wouldn't have felt like I was supposed to know this already.
Yeah. I definitely thought some of the exposition was a little on the nose. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I really love the mystery in this book. The prose is not why I enjoyed it. I actually made a note that I wanted to bring up the comparison between Wu-Wei, the main character's sister-in-law, his brother's wife, and the goddess. I'm just going to say the Jade Skirt because that is her epithet and much easier to pronounce. And then on the next page, the book just says, the similarities between Wu-Wei and the Jade Skirt were striking. I was like, oh, all right. I mean, yeah, you're not wrong, but okay.
Alliette de Bodard has a new novella. I think it's a novella out called Fireheart Tiger that came out in February. And I really would like to read it. I was interested in reading it previously, but I think it would be interesting to read it now to see how her writing has evolved or not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but
I just want to read the next, because this is the first book in a trilogy. I just want to read the rest of the trilogy because I really want to know what else is going on in Tenochtitlan. I
enjoyed this book, but I'm not sure that I would read the rest of the series because I was expecting it. The mystery was good. I liked the mystery and I liked the magic a lot, but the back of the book promised me political intrigue. And I felt that the political intrigue was not very great. It was very basic. And maybe that's just because I'm coming off of Wheel of Time, which has some great intrigue. But I felt like there was depth lacking.
I loved that because then it got me back to the good parts faster. I have never found politics to be particularly intriguing. So it's kind of a misnomer in my opinion. And so I didn't mind that at all.
I enjoy maneuvering between individuals for power and how that plays out. Yeah.
I think that what you're getting in this book is that a Coddle wants absolutely nothing to do with that. One of his driving motivations is to avoid the politics between the different temples completely. And so as readers, we are only seeing the effects of the political machinations. We aren't actually seeing them happen because he avoids it so much.
Right. But like there's a plot point where so his brother is on trial for murder and misuse of jaguar magic, essentially. And Akadal is trying to get into the trial to defend his brother. And he talks to this one magistrate. And this one magistrate is just really helpful. Like, why is this guy so nice? I'm not expecting there to be someone who does things out of the goodness of his heart in a book that promised me political intrigue.
So they do actually explain that at the end, after Akadal does win that case.
Why he was being so nice?
Yeah, the priest who was leading the prosecution was a huge dick, and the magistrate wanted to see someone beat him. Which is not a super in-depth reason, but they do give a reason.
I didn't find that to be particularly compelling a reason.
Well, that character is a jerk, so I believed it.
Yes, the character is a jerk, but
I also felt like that pulled on the sort of class tensions that show up in this book over and over again. How the politicians are sort of aloof, and then the warriors treat the priests like garbage, and then almost everyone treats the peasants like garbage. And so, because we see so much conflict around that structure, I totally believe that someone would want to just, I think they even use the phrase, take him down a peg. Like, I found that believable.
It just seemed
convenient.
Yeah, convenient, more basic than I was expecting. Like, again, I keep saying that I wanted more depth. And I think it was very surface level.
Well, to me, the mystery and the intrigue of this book is definitely rooted in, as we find out, the gods. The old gods who have been sort of forgotten and are worshipped less are a couple of them are trying to take power back, become in control again. And I think that's where most of the maneuvering is.
But again, I would have liked to see more of it. Like, we get told that that's what they're doing, but we don't actually see much of it.
Because we are stuck in the first-person perspective of this one guy. It's almost like first-person perspective is never the right idea.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you in this particular case.
But how would Akadal have known any of that? You know, we only find out as he does. It's
true.
We aren't seeing it happen. We are discovering it after the fact. It's a mystery, not an action.
Yeah. I guess the thrust of it is that I wanted more out of the mystery and the background.
Well, you wanted to see it happening. You didn't like just finding out about it after the fact. Yeah. It sounds like.
Which is not to say, again, it's not to say that I didn't enjoy this book. I did. Like, I happily read it. But I'm not sure that I would continue on with the series.
Well, I'm really interested to see how Akadal, at the end of the book, is much more willing to participate in temple life. He was a very reluctant leader for 99% of the book. And so seeing how his relationship with his second in command, who has been stuck doing all of his work for him until this point and is rightfully disgruntled by that.
Yes. I had a lot of sympathy for his second in command.
Oh, yeah, he was great. And, I should look up his name. Okay. I'm going to say Ichtaka. You can say Iktaka. We'll split the difference.
I'm just going to say his second in command.
I know. Okay, that is something I normally get very annoyed by epithets or not nicknames, but titles being overused in a book. But I greatly appreciated it here because, oh man, would I not have been able to keep all of the characters and gods with very long names I could not pronounce organized in my head if I didn't also have. I'm gonna try to say her name. I'm gonna try to say it. For example, one of the main gods we end up seeing is Chalchutlikwe. I'm not saying that right, but her epithet was the Jade Skirt, and that is much easier.
I didn't have any issue with the names when reading them.
There were a couple of times where I had to flip back to the previous page to see, are those the same person? Or so his apprentice worships the southern hummingbird and has a mother whose names both start with Huitz and then have a lot of letters after that. But my brain kind of only could grab on the first half. And so when the first time he says his mother's name, I thought, is that a grand reveal? Is your parent the southern oh, no, those are different names. All right.
But see, I feel like that has less to do, well, maybe it has something to do with how complicated the names are, but it also, if they were names more familiar to us that just differed by a couple of letters from each other, like I'd have trouble with that, keeping them straight anyway.
Right. So they're complicated because they were extremely similar.
Yeah.
And then the added dimension of names that I'm not familiar with, it was just a lot to keep track of, and having that additional sort of tagline helps me quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you've gotten this far, this is a mystery novel, why should you read this book? We've kind of told you some spoilers, but I think you still should. As someone who has now read it knowing how it ends, seeing how we got there was absolutely a fun trip. I would also say we gave away some of the more supernatural things going on in the background. There is still quite a bit of mystery to uncover in the physical world of this book that we didn't delve into at all. So even if you did listen to the spoiler section, I would say that we didn't even say what the original mystery that Akadal is investigating is. So I would say we spoiled some of the supernatural stuff, but not the mystery itself, and definitely not how you get there. So if you like mysteries, if you like supernatural stories, if the setting intrigues you, if a petty pantheon is your shtick, definitely read this book.
So our next topic of discussion is one that I feel you probably aren't expecting from a literature podcast. Can we call ourselves a literature podcast?
No.
a fiction podcast?
No.
A book podcast?
We very carefully crafted the subtitle and other words too on purpose.
Yes, but so what we're getting at is that we're going to be discussing cookbooks because we thought, why not?
Well, we both immediately had ideas for which cookbook to talk about too.
We did.
So it's not like we had to dig too deep.
We did, except that I changed my mind.
Well, that means you had two that you wanted to talk about. That's even better.
So you hinted at your cookbook in our opening. Do you want to tell us more about it?
Yes. For Christmas, except I'm a spoiled child and requested it in October when it came out.
Did you get it in October?
Yeah. I suck. I got Heroes Feast, the official Dungeons & Dragons cookbook. This is a cookbook that is completely in character, let's say. It is written as if all of these places and species are real, which is very, very fun. It is divided by culture. So you have your human cuisine and your elven cuisine and your uncommon cuisine. And as far as, some other ones, this may surprise you, but halfling cuisine is my favorite.
What about halfling cuisine makes it your favorite?
Well, there's a lot of stews, and they have an oatmeal cookie recipe that's really good. I've actually done recipes from every section, and I think every recipe that I've done, I have done more than once. I've been very impressed with the practicality. They are still definitely project meals. I wouldn't do one of these on a busy work night.
Even the stews?
Yeah, because it's one of those fry things first and put them in at different times, which is not how, not crock pots do.
Yeah.
But that being said, they're not as over the top as I sort of expected them to be.
Mm-hmm.
Before each section, there is a discussion of, the type of food that elves eat or dwarves eat, and a little bit of their culture. And each recipe has a little introduction talking about maybe how the recipe was developed in world, entirely like in character. And it's just so much fun.
It sounds, from what you've described to me, it sounds like a really fun cookbook.
The orc recipe is just a bunch of bacon in a mug. They give you, a recipe for a glaze to put on the bacon, but it is just a fistful of bacon.
That sounds, I want a fistful of bacon.
And then there is Arkin the Cruel's flame-roasted halfling chili, which is not a recipe from halflings. It is a recipe of halflings. The humor is just spot on. It's the first cookbook I've actually read cover to cover.
That says something, because cookbooks generally aren't made to be read cover to cover.
No.
Actually, so the cookbook that I was going to talk about was one that I really enjoyed reading as well. It's Fresh India by Minnesota. And the writing, normally I don't like the description in front of the recipe because I find it extraneous and unnecessary. But I found, like you did, I found her descriptions charming. And I also really enjoyed how she organized the table of contents. There were two different table of contents. There is one that's by type of recipe, and then also one by how long it took to prepare.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very useful.
I really like that. But that's not actually the book that I'm going to be talking about in this podcast, because when I was going to look at my cookbook shelf to grab that out for this discussion, I saw on the shelf Apicius, the Roman cookery book, translated by Barbara Flower and Elizabeth Rosenbaum. And I thought that would make for an interesting subject. So this book is a cookbook ostensibly by Apicius, who was a Roman culinary dude who lived in the 1st century. But in the introduction, the translators and authors of the book say that this book was actually probably compiled in the 4th or 5th century and involves a lot of recipes that were invented after Apicius. And I just found it interesting. I got this book kind of on a whim from my father. He sells books, and this was a book that I saw in his stack and took, basically.
Mysteriously acquired?
Mysteriously. Well, I did tell him that I was acquiring it. And it has such gems as patina of fish, green vegetables, and fruit. And as far as I can tell, a patina is some sort of egg custardy thing. This one in particular is an everyday patina. Pound boiled brains with pepper. Make into a mixture with cumin, asafoetida, liquamen, carinum, milk, and eggs. Cook over a low fire.
Yum.
Yes. I have not read the entire book. I actually, until we decided we were going to talk about cookbooks on this podcast, I had not read any of this book. It was just sitting on my shelf.
Well, it does sound interesting, but maybe less practical. I feel like I'm less likely to make a recipe with brains in it.
I'm not sure that I would actually cook anything from this recipe book. I like that it has the Latin on one side and the English on another. Not that I can read the Latin, but if I ever decided that I wanted to pick up Latin, I like that I could look at this and try to make something useful out of it.
Yeah.
So that's my cookbook.
Is there a single recipe in there that you think you might want to try sometime?
I've read about a grand total of 3 recipes, and they were all patina, and they all involved brains. So no.
Fair enough. I agree with you that I normally do not like. I think this is more of a thing that you see in food blogs, but it's a trope, right? That there's the entire life story before the actual recipe.
Yes.
The one website where I appreciate that, though, is The Kitchen. The KITCHN.
CHN.
Yeah. I have looked up, maybe because I'm looking up less recipes necessarily, but also strategies.
A lot of the times the pre-recipe content deals with issues that may come up when making the recipe.
Exactly, yeah. I use their articles for making sauerkraut and kimchi, and the information before the recipe itself gets into, tips and tricks, and if I tried this and that happened. So it was actually, like you said, relevant information.
Yeah, it's
not
not
hubby and the kids loved it.
Yeah, it's not, I was at the farmer's market one day and I saw this cabbage and it was the most beautiful cabbage, and it took me back to my days as a cabbage farmer on my grandparents' farm, and then I made this recipe.
Yep. Also, there's not actually any cabbage in it.
Yeah. I'm just making things up. I mean,
no, but I've definitely read recipes. I have found recipes that start one way and then it literally has nothing to do.
Yeah.
Recipes are wild, and finding a source that, has recipes that you actually like and is written in a way that does not make you want to pull your own teeth out is such a special thing.
It is. I really like the kitchen. I think I was the one who turned you onto it. I'm taking credit for it. So, 2 weeks on Twitter. Well, 3 if you're going by when this episode is released and not when we're recording, which makes that probably 4, actually. A number of weeks ago on Twitter, Bender, that's at Jack Claver, tagged us to answer this question, but I thought it would be more fun to have a discussion together rather than just give my own response on Twitter, since I'm the person who does our Twitter. And this was a challenge or question started by at Blog Spells, which is spellsandspaceships.com, a blog. And the question is, what are you a sucker for? So, Lily, what are you a sucker for?
I think I might have mentioned this before, but I have such a soft spot for amnesia storylines in a romance, or the amnesia trope in a romance story. I think a perfect example is in the Southern Vampire Mystery novels by Charlaine Harris, maybe better known as the True Blood series. In, I think it's book 4, Eric Northman gets amnesia and doesn't realize that he's not on good terms with the main character, and so decides that they're best friends, and then, they fall madly in love, but it's not actually him.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't they have a lot of sex too?
Yes, of course. I already covered the romance part. And then he gets his memories back and it's a whole thing. And I don't know why. I think because it is such a... I know amnesia is a real thing, but not really. Not in the way that this trope handles it. And so it is such a, absurd scenario that I don't have to bring any critical thinking to the table. It's just fun. And that tension between two characters where one of them has more context than the other, and then them trying to work through that, when it's done well, I really, really like it. And when it's not done well, I usually like that too. How about you?
So I think if I had to choose something, I would probably say that I'm a sucker for hot but evil. And there's 2 parts to that answer. There's the one part where you have a villain of dubious morality who often has some sort of will they, won't they relationship with the main character. I guess enemies to lovers, except it's never resolved, right?
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is Eric Northman from True Blood. Basically, you could have answered this by just tweeting a GIF of Alexander Skarsgård, and it would have been correct for both of us.
Yes, maybe you're right. A really good example of this would be Servalan and Avon in Blake 7, which is an old, I think it's 1970s, but don't quote me on that, British sci-fi show. Let me actually Google that. Yeah, so Blake 7 was a show that aired between 1978 and 1981. And I definitely want to talk more about Blake 7 when we do our February Doctor Who episode, because I love Blake 7. Blake 7 is an older love for me than even Doctor Who, which is saying something because I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. Where was I going with this? Avon and Servalan.
Those are the ones.
Yeah. But so Avon is ostensibly a good guy, but he's a really morally dubious good guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself, I love. And then you have Servalan, who is unabashedly like a supreme commander of the Federation or something. She's very definitely the bad guy, but there's such tension between her and Avon that I just love it. And Servalan herself is fantastic. She, being a military commander, you would expect that she would be very masculine, and she has super, super short hair, right? Her hair is like a pixie cut, but she wears these amazing, gorgeous gowns the entire time.
Good for them.
Yeah, no, I love her. She played by Jacqueline Pierce, R.I.P., who had a lot of issues herself, but seemed to be a really interesting person. And so I love that dynamic.
It's interesting that both of our answers have an aspect of enemies to lovers.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the underlying trope that we're both suckers for.
Maybe, but we're particular suckers for this specific way of doing it.
Yeah.
Because I should clarify, like I said, any amnesia, but where it's two people who don't get along and then one of them forgets that and then decides they're into the other one is like my favorite way that it plays out. Specifically, Eric and Sookie. And I don't even want to say True Blood because the show is not what I'm talking about at all.
In the Sookie Stackhouse mystery. It's Sookie Stackhouse Mysteries, right?
Yeah, they are the Southern Vampire Mysteries. So you're right. Maybe a way of summarizing it is just enemies to lovers.
Yeah. Except that I also enjoy it when they don't actually get to that lover part.
Just the tension.
Yeah, just the tension where there's the implication that maybe if the story went another way, they could. Like there's this avenue left open for all the fan fiction.
Ah, so you like having that potential.
Yes.
There is a fan fiction tag, which is dumbasses to lovers. Which is not the same thing, but also very good.
Yeah, I like that too. I do like that too.
Sarah, you sent me the most disgruntled text the other day.
It's I am so gruntled. I am so gruntled. I have an addition for the Pet Peeve Corner. I think this might be my first time adding something to the Pet Peeve Corner.
Welcome to these hallowed halls of being very annoyed at things that don't matter.
I'm very grateful to the particular person who misuses this word for allowing me the opportunity to complain about it. I mean, not that he knows that I'm complaining about it, but my DM for one of the D&D games that I play, actually technically it's Pathfinder, whatever, same thing.
Also, Dungeon Master.
Yes. My Dungeon Master for the Pathfinder game that I play uses the word graciously in place of thankfully or luckily. Like, I have some examples pulled directly from conversation with him. One of them is, graciously, my career path is such that they do actually tend to pay you enough to live where you work. And the other is from a Pathfinder session. None of the pirates from the previous night are here, graciously. And that is not what the word means.
I'm just imagining these very gracious pirates choosing to not come back because they're so considerate.
That's not what graciously means. And he uses it. It's not like he uses it infrequently. Like if he used it maybe once a week, I could deal with it. But he uses it multiple times in a conversation.
Oh no.
It's a lot. It is a lot. And it's like nails on a chalkboard.
Oh.
I haven't found it in myself to tell him that that's not what the word means. Cause I don't like when someone misuses how can I do that? I also don't feel like we're good enough friends to do that.
That's also not a word that is worth correcting. That's more of a verbal quirk.
Yeah. It's a quirk, but oh my God.
It's not like they mixed up circumvent and circumspect.
Yeah.
You know, that would be something worth correcting. Like, hey, those are actually different.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
graciously.
graciously and thankfully are two different words, but
Right.
it's not at the level of difference. I agree with you.
Oh, that's so, well, I think disgruntled really is the only way to say it.
Yeah, I just, oh my God. And it's all the time. It's all the time.
I had a professor who used ostensibly as a filler word, which everyone has filler words. God knows we have filler words, which I'm sure our listeners are very familiar with.
We definitely have filler words.
But ostensibly is such a $5 word that you can't get away with that. English was like her third language, so you can't actually complain about it either.
Yeah.
It just was very noticeable because of that.
I'm willing to let that slide. Yeah. English is this person's only language. It is his first language. He doesn't know any other language. Like, he gets no credit.
No. Graciously. Yikes.
That's about all one can say. Yikes.
Yikes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at fictionfanspod, and you can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.